check this out. So the earliest scientific journal, published in 1665 by the Royal Society, was called, full title, Philosophical Transactions, giving some account of the present undertaking, studies and labours of the ingenious in many considerable parts of the world. I mean, screw nature, I want to publish this thing. The goal of a scientific researcher is to make new discoveries about the world. So what do they do when they make such a discovery? One of the first things they do is write a research paper about it and publish it in a scientific journal. So what is a scientific journal? Well, a scientific journal is one of these things. It's basically a magazine that is filled with papers published by scientists about the discoveries they've made. So the papers incorporate the methods and the data they've produced, and also explanations of what the data means. Tap, 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 tap. Journals range from very broad to highly specific. Very broad, like the journal Science, which incorporates pretty much anything from any field in science. But you can also get much more selective journals. So how does a researcher decide which journal to publish in? Well, there are a few considerations to make here, and one of them is the prestige of the journal. So how do we determine which journals are better than others? One of the most common methods for rating journals is called the impact factor. Let's backtrack a couple of steps to explain what an impact factor is. When you write a paper, you include references to other papers that are relevant to what you've just written. This is a large list at the end of your paper, and these are called citations. So obviously after you've published your work, there will hopefully come a point where somebody will cite your paper, and then your paper will have a citation. The importance of a paper to the scientific community is often judged based on how many citations it has. So if one particular journal is constantly publishing papers that have high citation rates, then you can say that that journal is having a high impact on the scientific community. Thus the term impact factor. The term impact factor is defined as the average number of citations received per paper for a particular journal. So for example, the Journal of Organic Chemistry has an impact factor of 1.6. Every paper published by that journal has on average been cited by someone else 1.6 times. The journal with the highest impact factor to date is a Cancer Journal for Clinicians, which has an impact factor of 162. The impact factor is not a perfect system, but it's widely used. Now obviously a Cancer Journal for Clinicians is pretty specific, but the two most famous scientific journals are much broader. The two most famous journals that are quite generic are quite simply called Nature and Science. These journals publish everything from cell biology to physics and everything in between. Very groundbreaking research, things that are really important to pretty much anyone studying science. Pretty much the best thing you can do for your research career is get published in one of these journals. Now Nature has a lot of subdivision journals, so Nature Physics, Nature Biotechnology, and they also have high acclaim and people are very keen to get published in those, but really they don't have much on this guy. Right, so journals and their publishing groups have to make money like any other company. They have employees who are generally keen on food and housing. So how does a journal make money? Well, the same way any other publication does, you have to pay to read the articles they publish. Most universities and large scientific institutions generally pay a subscription fee to the journal so that any one of its employees or students can read any paper from that journal's entire history. But anyone can actually go to the journal's website and pay an individual price for a single paper. And of course journals, like anything published, can make a lot of money from advertising. There are a growing number of what we call open access journals. These are journals where the papers are freely available to readers. You don't have to pay for them at all. These are usually online only journals where, I did mention that, didn't I? All the journals I've mentioned are published both in print and online. Most researchers will just read the individual papers that are of interest to them online. So open access journals are free for anyone with internet access to read, but often require the author to pay a nominal fee to publish in them. Alternatively, many large journals offer the author the option to pay an extra fee so that their paper is free to access. Unlike other papers in the journal, it is not behind a paywall and anyone can read it for free. As with many things in science and education, trying to balance the need to pay people for their work and the desire to spread knowledge is difficult. The most important thing about scientific journals is that they adopt the process of peer review. So when someone writes a paper and they send it off to a journal to be published, the first thing the journal will do is send that paper off to other people who work in the same field, but who obviously didn't write the paper and don't work for the journal. The people then read the paper and with their expertise knowledge in the field decide if anything written in the paper is unjustified, or if the experiments are flawed, or if there's something wrong with the conclusions they draw from the data they've gathered. These peers think that everything in the paper looks like it meets the scientific standards of the time and is accepted by the publishers and published. More often than not, the peers will request one or two extra experiments or a little bit more data. One important thing to note is that the reviewers never actually repeat any of the experiments to prove that they work as described. The value of a researcher is often judged by their publications, whether by the quantity of their publications or by the prestige of the journal they've published in. The likelihood of a researcher getting a job or a grant is often dependent on their publications. Now, whether this is an accurate measure of the value of a researcher or not, well, that's a little complex. What? Oh, all right. I'll get back to work. As any chemist knows, recrystallization is basically magic.